This first presentation addresses the Context for Learning Information section of your edTPA notebook. It is included with the instructions for Task 1. By the end of this presentation, you will be able to explain why context is very important to student learning and to your edTPA. You will also have a good understanding of how to describe the context of your school, the specific class that relates to your edTPA, and the students within that class. Any seasoned teacher will tell you that the context for a learning environment does not necessarily dictate if a student will learn, but it will play a key role in how a student will learn. Therefore, the first thing that edTPA asks you to do is to describe the school, class, and students in that class. It's highly important to remember that you should be as specific as possible, citing as many explicit details as you can. edTPA is not asking you to be stereotypical and use mostly broad and sweeping statements. Rather, they want a good overview of the situation on which your lessons will be based. The handbook goes as far as saying that if you're going to cite something about a student, the class, or the school, which you cannot truthfully verify as a fact, do not say it in the first place. In other words, consider yourself a researcher, not someone writing an editorial. The first section that you will describe will be regarding your school. Here, you are asked to state the grade levels of your school, elementary, middle, or high school. Then you will discuss its location, such as urban, suburban, or rural. A school's location can certainly play a role in how things are done, as well as the overall tone in a specific building. Here you want to be descriptive without making those broad statements. For example, if you were teaching in a rural school and saw a couple students wearing John Deere hats, it would not be fair to say something like, "Nearly everyone in my 5th period seems to be wearing John Deere hats. Their families must all be farmers." While you might not mean anything expressly derogatory with that kind of a statement, it's still not in the spirit of a researcher to make such a claim. Instead, you should try to be as specific as possible without drawing broad conclusions without any kind of cause. Not only will you describe the location and age group of your school and class, you also need to mention any special features that could be relevant to the grader. The special features of the school could be things like, is this a charter or a magnet school, or does it have any particular theme, such as very tech-heavy, or really into STEM or arts? Or does the school use many aides in the classroom, or or team teaching? Lastly, it's important to note any additional information that an edTPA scorer should know. These could be issues like certain requirements from the principal or your cooperating teacher. Perhaps a certain teacher does not allow you much leeway in his or her class because of pressure to teach towards the upcoming standardized tests, or a rigorous following of the Engage New York modules. In short, this could be anything that you would like your grader to know about your experience in that school or classroom before they actually start to read through your lessons. The next layer up moves from the overall school to the specific classroom in which the student teacher is working. And while this first bullet point may seem like a simple question, it can get quite complicated. First, when speaking about an elementary classroom, the way that a cooperating teacher and/or student teacher might break up the day is varied. In this case, it's important to note the amount of time an elementary teacher is working on a particular subject within a given day. Second, in a middle or high school classroom, a student teacher's lesson plans for a 40-minute versus a 90-minute class really should look quite different. It is very important to let the grader know what kind of schedule that this school or class employs. It could be a true block schedule to a modified block, or to a situation where the students only have specific classes every other day. There is much variance in the world of school schedule, so please be specific and explicit. The actual schedule aside, one student's particular cooperating teacher may require other ancillary items. Let's say something like an announcement at the start of the class, or some random discussion at the beginning or end of class, which can eat into time for content. Now, this is not a judgment on how the CT is running the classroom, but it's also important to note it so that the grader has the most complete picture of how things operate in this particular room. Next, students should discuss any particular grouping that goes on in that classroom. For example, does the cooperating teacher have a system for how he or she wants any group work to be handled? Is this an honors class, or is there some other grouping that's out of the control of the student teacher? Any specific books or programs that are teacher and or school specific should also be pointed out. Such programs may offer less creativity when planning lessons and activities, though that is not necessarily true. These may be instructional and or reading programs, or they might be behavioral programs like PBIS. Lastly, students should catalog the other resources which are used in this classroom. Things like electronic whiteboards or just an abundance of other technology would be important for a grader to know. Remember, you need to assume that your grader knows nothing except what you write to him or her. Be a detailed researcher and give as much information as possible, while remaining within the page allotments for each section. This piece of the context for learning is perhaps the most specific. It relates to the actual students in a given classroom. While the first two bullets are very simple and need only a few words of explanation, the last might need a great amount of depth, depending on the student-teacher's classroom. Student teachers will be filling out a chart in their respective edTPA handbooks, cataloging any students with IEPs, 504s, specific language issues, or any other needs that must be accommodated. Just to recap, you should now be able to explain why showing the context of your school is important for your edTPA graders. You should also have the tools and information necessary to be able to describe the context in each of its parts. One final thing to remember is that this section may not be any more than 4 single-spaced pages. That includes the prompts as well as your answers. So choose your wording carefully. You can still be descriptive without being overly wordy. Remember, the goal is to paint a detailed picture for the grader. And tedious though it might seem, it is paramount that you do not submit your $300 edTPA with insufficient writing. To review, you should carefully describe the location of your school and your classroom by being as specific as you can, while avoiding stereotypes and sweeping statements. Also, be sure to point out any special features of the class like tracking or grouping of students, as well as any curricular materials that you are required to use. Be fair, honest, and descriptive. In short, try to think and write like a researcher. In our next set of slides, we will look at Task 1, Planning for Instruction. In this task, you are asked to provide the basis for what you want to teach, why you want to teach it, and how you are going to teach and assess it.